It happened during the summer vacation when I was 11. My parents and I always go to South India for at least 1 month to see the family. Now, during the whole month of June, there is what we call in our little village the Mango Festival, Mangani Festival. And it's a religious festival where divinity statues are exhibited in parades. There is a large alley filled all along with small temporary stands where people can buy a lot of different things like street food, fruits, toys, clothes and more, all at very cheap prices. My mom and I always go to these stores in the evening at around 5 or 6 when it was already dark, because going during the daytime is just too exhausting with the unbearable heat plus the ground. At that time though, the alley is still very bright, lit up by the stores and decorative lights. That day, my mom decided to stop at a shoe flip-flop stand to buy me some. The seller proceeded to show my mom the collections, and when he noticed my present, he just locked his eyes on me. In the beginning, it didn't bother me much. I just thought that I might look like someone he knew. But he kept staring at me the whole time. He was picking his moment to stare at me, and when my mom was looking in my direction, he'd stop and he'd stare back again when she looked away. It was obvious at that point though, and it made me very uncomfortable. Eventually, we had to leave without buying anything, but the seller insisted that we should come tomorrow because he had a new shipment of whatever new collections were arriving. 2 days later, my mom called me to go to the festival stands, but I was reluctant to go this time. I told her I was genuinely tired and didn't want to go. But she yelled at me, saying that I was always lazy and wasting my summer vacation by staying at home all day. So I went with them. Our first shop was the cheap jewelry store. Then my mom made me do something that I always hated, but she did it all the time in order to help me with my shyness. She said, "Take my purse and go to the shoe stand by yourself and buy a pair that you like. I'll be watching you from here." I refused at first, but she progressively raised her voice. So to avoid being humiliated in front of other kids, I did what she said. When he saw me approaching his stand, he welcomed me with his unsettling smile. He proceeded to show me all his new sandals. And as I was his only customer, he even took the time to put the sandals on me, one by one, asking if they fit well. At that point, I just took whatever shoe quickly to get out of there. And now, it was time for the checkup. I was and still am stressed to order or talk to a vendor. I used to stutter a lot during the social situations, but this time, it was different. It wasn't only stress, and this gut feeling telling me that this man is strange and that I shouldn't be here with him alone. I handed him the money and was waiting for my change. But his demeanor suddenly changed. He became fidgety and showed frustration over the cash register. He then said that the cash register had broken for some unknown reason and that he wouldn't open. I glanced outside to see if my mom was still watching me. And she was. And when we made the eye contact, she made a gesture with her hand telling me to hurry. She was observing at an angle, and I was next to the cash register at the corner. I couldn't see a property anymore. And at the same time, the seller told me that he had another cash register in his trailer. So then he took my money and went there. It was a sort of open shop, so you could see his trailer if you were right in front of it. He went inside his trailer for a long time, and I could hear the voices of another person inside. They were talking, but I couldn't understand exactly what they were saying. So for around 10 minutes, I was just standing there waiting awkwardly and peeking back at my mom occasionally to make her aware of my presence at the checkout. Then another client entered the shop and was looking at the merchandise. She asked me where the vendor was, and I told her He was in the trailer. At the sound of our conversation, the vendor peeked from the trailer window and said to the woman, "We aren't taking any more clients, ma'am. We were closing soon." The woman left soon after, but it seemed strange that he decided to close so suddenly and so early. It was only 6 p.m., and usually the shop is closed late between 8 or 9. I couldn't leave though, as I was still waiting to get my change back. Then the vendor picked me up from his trailer's window again and said that he'd finally managed to get my change. He then made a sign with his hand, as if to say, "Come here." I wasn't sure about what he wanted, so I said nothing and waited where I was awkward. After a moment he peeked again and said, "You can come now." I was confused. Why couldn't you just come outside and give me my change back? And why the hell he was taking so much time? I didn't say anything, but instead I peeked back outside to see my mom. And when she saw my concerned face, she finally decided to come and help me. I said to the seller, "Actually, I'm waiting for my mom." And when my mom entered the shop, the seller got out of his trailer almost immediately and handed my change back. He wasn't frustrated anymore, but smiling and very talkative, and even asked my mom if we were from here, to which she responded that we were from France and we were spending our summer vacation in our hometown. My mom and I went to other shops, but I could still see other clients coming to the shoe shop, even though he was going to close. By the time Mom had finished her shopping, it was 8 p.m., and we were on our way back home. I could still see the lights from his shop when we got closer. And I could even see he was using the same cashier that was supposed to be broken. At that age, I didn't realize how creepy this whole thing was. It just seemed odd and awkward. But years later, I finally realized that his gaze, his behavior, and his touches were all so wrong. And that night, I bet his intentions were even worse. Luckily, that night was the last time I ever saw him, and during the festival of the following year, I couldn't find his stand anymore, and his slot was occupied by a street food stand. So yeah, creepy shoe seller, let's never meet again, please.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. When I was 19, I was a Marine, and had stupidly used my military perks to get a home loan and buy my first house. I moved a barracks room worth of stuff into this place that seemed to me like a palace. Of course, I went out and bought some bar stools, a futon to sleep on, until I got a bed and some used coffee tables for my TV. I also had a dog with me. I was unpacking my meager belongings in the living room and noticed the car had pulled in my driveway and blocked me in. I walked down, and there stood a man offering to sell me a home security system. The man was dressed in khaki and a polo with a name tag that I can't recall, and the car didn't have a logo on it. It should have been a red flag for me, but I figured that some people in the job didn't drive company vehicles. He gave me his card. I don't even remember the company he told me he was with, to be honest. Here was a friendly salesman giving me his speech about needing a system and all the perks that would come with being able to wash the exterior of my house at any time. As a low-ranking military member, I knew I couldn't afford yet another thing, so my mind was working to try to get this man to go away. Even considered ninja chopping him or whatever it was we Marines do in hand-to-hand just to get him to leave. But I'm a sort of passive person. I suppose I'm nice. Now, we'll call it polite. I won't be rude to someone doing their job. I've been in customer service, so I could relate. I tried politely declining his offer after he had tried to show me some stuff on his iPad, but you know how persistent the types can be. I'll admit, my own stupidity when answering his questions, like giving out too much information. Do you live here alone? Now, I live here with my wife and our large 3 dogs. At least I added in the large part. Her dogs hadn't actually moved in yet, and hers were just fat, though they were more vicious than my own good boy. The 2 women living together probably seemed like easier targets. I also mentioned being a Marine when he asked. He had seemed a bit shocked but wouldn't be deterred. What kind of security system do you have? My dogs and me? Not the best answer I could have given. I wasn't exactly intimidating. I mean, I would be terrifying if I had a gun or something. I've been using my whole life and I've never missed a target, alive or inanimate. If you would invite me in, I could show you the best places to set off cameras. He mentioned more than a few times. Each time made me more and more creeped out, thinking that he wanted to potentially rob me. Not that there was much to take, and despite being an assault victim, not all I could consider was possible burglary, and made sure that he stayed away from my house while we talked. We were outside for about 15 minutes total, and he spent most of the time trying to politely get away from him and retreat inside. I wound up at my wits' end with social niceties and just walked away, leaving him standing alone in my front yard. I walked into my house and locked the door. He got into his car and left, and I thought nothing more of it. After some unpacking, I couldn't do much. I had nowhere to put most of it. I ate some junk food and put together the futon. I got it all decked out with my fluffiest blankets, made sure the doors and windows were locked, and went to lay down in the living room. Looking back, I'm not sure why I didn't put it in the bedroom. They all have blinds in the rooms, take a bit of getting to. Perhaps I'm wanting to be near an exit, or some context my back door is a double glass pane door. At the time I didn't have curtains on, but I did have blinds in the kitchen window. My kitchen, living room, and dining room are all connected, but there's a wall in the living room that I strategically situated my futon, again so it couldn't be seen by the back doors or the front door window. Call me paranoid, whatever. I had been laying down for a few hours, and about 11, my dog off the futon and went to the back door. My dog is large and looks like a Rottweiler in coloring. He's a Coonhound Max, but I guess city people don't have hunting dogs. But he's never heard anything in his life. He'll greet strangers at the door with the tail wagging hardly barks. He stood back there for a bit and whined a few times. I ignored him. It was probably just a squirrel. But then he started growling. A sound that I'll never forget. It sent terror straight through me as I sat alone in the dark. I'd only ever felt that fear once when a mountain lion screamed, and I realized that I was powerless against nature. But that's a story for a different thread. The point is these sounds are designed to scare you, and it petrified me. I was frozen and wanted to whip out to hide to call the cops, but I realized it was someone was out there, and they'd for sure see my phone light and know where I was. So while my dog stayed stationed at the back door, I talked myself up just enough to move off the couch and investigate. Still scared out of my mind, I slunk to the kitchen and grabbed a kitchen knife, one of the only utensils I had thanks MA, and crept to the kitchen window. I was squatting amongst the cabinets so I couldn't be seen from indie windows, bouncing a little, trying to gear up to peel back the blinds. My brain was telling me irrational things, horror stories that I had read come to life. To be real, I was ready to just cower and give up. I'm not a brave person. I was in communications, for God's sake, pretty far from any life-threatening situation. Well, not one of them involves people in my house, and my one safe space, my hideout, my protection from anything outside wanting in. I've always been afraid of home invasions that stem from an incident when I was younger that isn't even really worth further mentioning. The point being, if someone dares into my safe place, it's not safe anymore. I thought I couldn't get scared more in that moment, but then I saw a male figure in my backyard, and my heart dropped. I wasn't very far from the window I was looking out of. He was bold enough not to wear anything over his head, and I saw the blonde hair in the moonlight. It only took me a few seconds to recognize the security salesman in the dark. He was on the edge of my porch, watching my back door, watching my dog. I jumped up quickly, climbed over the bar counter, and turned on the light as it went toward the back door to let my still growling dog out in hopes that he did at least get rid of the man, if not injure him. No dice. As soon as the lights came on, he had just enough time to go low, the low part of the fence, to safety, before my dog even got off the porch. I didn't sleep that night. My dog sat on the futon with me. Comas could be having done this job. The next morning, I found a police report, but I couldn't tell his name or what company he was with, having lost the card that he gave me. They sent some patrols through the area, and I found out that all legitimate salesmen should give an idea of Honda request. That night, I had 2 friends stay with me ready for him to come back to either try to rob me or commit some nefarious acts or be trying to scare me into home security. It didn't come back. I haven't seen him since. My dog hasn't growled like that since either, but I'm terrified for the next time that I hear it.
It happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to scuba dive during Christmas holidays. My family and I, a 25-year-old female, booked a few dives. They're all really good scuba divers, better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that allowed them to participate in way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well. I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor. Yet even more, if it's a dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving, here's a quick explanation. You can dive safely into a certain depth before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while going back to the surface at a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you rise up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in a worst-case scenario, to death. So we decided that I could manage a little private lesson with my instructor first prior to more exciting dives with my family. So the first day my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to while I was alone with my instructor and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay. We were on a beautiful coral reef. There were many beginners on the boats. I was by far the more experienced here. So finally, my instructor decided that he could manage me with another student who was truly a beginner. After small briefing with safety rules and hand signs, which is the only way to communicate underwater, we began our descent. I quickly retrieved all my old reflexes and was enjoying myself going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver for at least 20 minutes. Everything was perfect besides one thing. It was a windy day and there was a heavy swell. It's less of a problem under the water than it is for surface swimmers. The only thing is that it requires more physical effort to swim, so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which was normal. I signed to my instructor that I was running thin of air, and he nodded. It was at this level far from being critical. It was at this moment that I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor its student. I've never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot. So I assumed he was with us, and I just didn't pay any attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards me and then signaled to me that he was out of air. When a failure happens while scuba diving, there is a very strict procedure. You have to help the person with no questions asked, because every second is vital. You find on underwater gear you have breathing devices, regulators, octopus, I'm not sure about the English word, a main device, and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing with my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited till the guy seemed to calm down and tried to hand sign him to go see my instructor. He nodded no and signed to me to start an ascent. I understand this procedure. I was a little low on air, above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was going up to the surface before having an air failure. I had to tell my instructor first. This guy was very reluctant, which was strange. It would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started an ascent with us. During this time, I was panicking at seeing my own level going down, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. Once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving us toward the beach without the strange guy that I asked my instructor about what happened. I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down. They replied, okay. Why did he tell me that he was out of air though? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signal, and that he was probably not telling me he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. I'm sure I saw him do the air failure sign, but it was okay, I guess. The next day, I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time, Charlie. I've had time to think about that guy, and I was worried about him. So I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew the guy and if he was okay, because I didn't see him going back to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did. She told me, oh, that's Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time he has a day off from the restaurant, he's working here. He asked us to dive him on the coral reef that morning and to pick him up in the afternoon. I ate at his restaurant this noon, saw him. I was feeling relieved and told myself that it was just a comprehension issue with Marvin. The rest of the week went without any incident. I was doing more and more technical dives, and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor, and I never saw Marvin again. That is, until the last dive. It was on New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck, and I felt trained enough to try it without my instructor. Just my family and I, and it was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me, 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too. So we would cross him and help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, and my family felt comforted when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. It was at that moment that I saw Marvin swimming toward me. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, but still staying under my decompression stop level. I was a little surprised, and even more surprised when he signaled me again that he was out of air. I was distrustful, but if there was any chance that it would be true, I couldn't not help him. So I handed him my spare breather. But this time, I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't really an issue. He took it, started breathing it in, and took my arm. I reached to see his air level instruments, but he prevented me from seeing it. Then he signed me to start in descent with him. I immediately signed no. I wasn't at my deepest when he reached, but I have been deeper during this time, and I've had a decompression stop to do. I saw that my father saw us, and he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer device, which calculates when and how long to decompress to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled at me, and started swimming up, still holding me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress now. I then understood that I was in danger, and that if I'd let him do what he wanted, I would die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wiggling frantically as I saw my father and sister way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly toward us, and I managed to hit the guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper. The guy then quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. Then he started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously. Once we reached the surface, I started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my old instructor, and this was why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told it to my old instructor, who took it more seriously this time, and told me to show him Marvin when we would go up to the surface. Thing is, he never did. The next day on New Year's, we went one last time to the scuba diving club because my little sister had a diploma to collect. We saw Charlie still choked up. I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffened. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and he didn't go scuba diving, which means that this guy wasn't Marvin. And to this day, I still don't know who he is, or what he wanted, or why he tried to kill me. Maybe twice.